I'm Draven. I typically make high gain amp demos here on YouTube, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Friedman BE Deluxe 100. And with today's video, I wanted to do something a little different. Instead of the usual, run it through a demo song and go through all the knobs and switches and stuff. Over the last couple of years of doing all the demos and stuff, I've gotten a lot of interesting questions on how I dial in amps and what I'm looking for in amps and all that kind of stuff. And so for this video, I thought it would be kind of a perfect example of how I go through amps and kind of decide whether I like it or not, or if it's something that I would want to purchase and have in my collection. Since of course I want as many amps as possible, as most people do, but I'm also pretty picky with what I like to have in my collection, since I don't really want things that just kind of sit that I don't actually use. And so that way I have space for things that I would actually use and have the funds to be able to get the things that I actually want. And so with this one, this is an amp that I've definitely thought about buying on multiple occasions, since I'm a huge fan of the kind of modded Marshall stuff. But these are really expensive, around $4,000 new, which is way too much for me to spend on an amp personally. And I'm really glad I got the chance to check it out, thanks to Kyle Bowl. And so like I said earlier, we're going to go through the amp, and I'm going to try and talk you guys through how I go through it. And I'm going to do my best to explain kind of my thoughts as I go through the amp, see whether it's something that I would want to buy and have in my collection or not. And yeah, I just thought this would be kind of the perfect amp to do that with, since I've tried a ton of different kind of modded Marshall style things. And once you get into this kind of price range, you don't really find much that's bad. And considering that a lot of them are based on the same thing or have very similar types of mods done to them, it really comes down to little details and just quality and personal preferences. And you can even argue that morals come into it, as silly as that may sound. And while preparing for this video, I kind of put a little list together of the things that I think I look for in an amp. And yeah, hopefully I can get my point across with it. And so to start this off, a super important thing to me when kind of getting into checking out an amp that you want to buy and keep, is what you're playing it through and what all you're using to try it out. And so for me it's a little different, since I have the ability to get this kind of stuff. But personally for me, it's really hard to decide if I don't have the things that I would usually use. And so I don't really buy amps that I haven't had here, which I know isn't always the case for everyone. But I think as we go through the list of things that I look for, it should be helpful no matter the case. And so the few pieces of gear that I always grab for when checking out an amp will be my WKM, which obviously I just really enjoy this guitar, but I also play it daily, so I know it really well, and I know how amps and stuff react with it, as well as we'll be going ahead and boosting it at some point with the Spooky Vibes Night Terror, since I know that pedal really well. And then I have it going through my Calypso 412 with Mesa V30 speakers and a SM57, since again, I know those really well. And while it may be the case that, maybe this amp doesn't work super well with this cab or this boost or guitar, but these are things that I use all the time, and so I would like them to react well with those. Those are the things that I use all the time, which is why I feel like it's important to use those things while checking it out. So yeah, let's go ahead and get everything plugged in, and we'll start going through kind of my little list that I made and see where we end up with it. If you end up enjoying this video, make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, I have some affiliate links down in the description where if you want to pick something up, helps me out a ton. And yeah, let's see if I would want to buy this amp or not. Alright, so I got everything set up and everything's working. I'm just running my guitar into a noise gate, into the Spooky Vibes Night Terror, which is currently off. And then we're going to be focusing on the BE channel and the HBE channels. I don't really do a lot of clean stuff, so I'm not really worried about the clean channel, which also there's a bunch of switches on the back of the amp that we're going to be kind of just skipping over. I've messed with them a little bit and kind of got them just where I like them, which ended up being all of them off, which was mainly a clipping and saturation switches, which we'll kind of get to later. And so starting off, the first thing I go for is the gain knobs to see how much gain we have, and also kind of the relationship between the gain and saturation. Typically my personal preference is I like the option to have a ton of gain, but I don't like a ton of saturation, especially in the like lower and low mid frequencies. So currently we are on the BE channel, and we're just going to go ahead and go through the gain knob and see what we can get out of it, and I'll try and give you kind of my thoughts on that. So something that I look for when the gain is set lower is with some modded Marshalls, from what I understand, the first few gain, like the first and second gain stage, could be set too hot. And so when you have the gain set super low and hit it kind of hard, it can sound kind of like gravelly and like you can almost hear things like clipping. So I like to check if that's something that's happening, because if that's something that is happening when I'm using a boost pedal, I like to have the volume all the way up on the pedal most of the time and pulling the gain back to get the amount of gain that I want. If I pull it back too much, hitting it with the boost pedal is just going to exaggerate that kind of explosive sound, which so far this amp doesn't have that, which is nice. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for with the gain set low. So I'm not hearing any like weird clipping or anything like that. And so as we get past like noon on the gain knob, what I'm looking for is how much gain I can get out of it that's still usable. Because with some amps, as you get past like 2 o'clock or something like that, like say a rectifier, it gets overly saturated and just like, and you just lose all like note clarity and pick attack and stuff like that. Typically with modded Marshall style stuff, they kind of excel in that area, and so we'll kind of mess with that. So far at the roughly 2 o'clock mark, we're still getting good pick attack. But you can kind of hear the low end starting to like fill in or get a little muddy. So here with the gain maxed out, we're still getting some good pick attack, but you're starting to hear the like low mids and stuff kind of take over a little bit. So with that being said, the gain on the BE channel would kind of pass all of the things that I would want. And so we'll go ahead and back the gain off and hit it with the boost and see how it reacts to that. So it reacts really well to a boost, not getting any of that kind of clipping kind of stuff that I was talking about. And so from here, we'll kind of do the same thing with the HBE channel and just kind of check the gain and all that. Right off the bat, it kind of seems like this channel has more saturation and the pick attack seems a little more subdued. Considering that we're at noon on the gain knob. With the gain set lower, we're not getting any of that kind of weird explosive stuff. As I'm getting to the max gain, I'm definitely getting a little overwhelmed with the like low mid and just overall lower end saturation and stuff. It's getting a bit muddy and just kind of mushy, but surprisingly it's still retaining some pick attack, which kind of like I mentioned earlier, like modded Marshall stuff tends to do that, which is kind of why I like them. And so just like the last channel, I'll back that off and we'll check it with the boost. And yeah, I think overall the gain staging and stuff on this amp works really well with this setup. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the EQ. And typically what I'm looking for in the preamp EQ is, of course, like being able to dial it into a way that I like, but ideally being able to dial it in a few ways that I like, as well as each of the knobs having a wide range of a kind of usable space. And so we'll go through and see what each knob kind of has to offer and fine tune it with and without a boost. Definitely has a lot of low end with this specific setup. It doesn't have a huge area that tightens it a bunch. We basically kind of, as you might have heard, had like this like almost on switch right here at the like, what was that, like 10 o'clock-ish area. You kind of hear the low end come in and then out. Instead of being like a gradual drop, there's like kind of a hump, I would say. So right there, like kind of almost turns on. And so we'll kind of leave that there and go through the mid knob. The mid knob has a pretty wide spread, and the areas that it's pushing and cutting aren't overly modern, I would say. And so you can set it pretty high without it getting like harsh. And so let's go ahead and check out the treble knob. The treble knob also has a pretty wide spread, as well as doesn't get overly harsh when you crank it, which is nice. But definitely helps the kind of pick attack come through. And so we'll go ahead and turn the boost on and kind of see where we can get with that. Definitely tightens it up a lot. One of my favorite things about using a boost pedal is typically you can get a lot more out of the bass knob. Maybe not in a kind of like more low end, but more control. So we'll go ahead and mess with the bass knob. So the nice thing about tightening up the tone before the amp is we're able to move away from that kind of notch that we found in like the 10 o'clock-ish area of the bass knob. And now we're pushing into like the 2 o'clock area, which helps us like kind of fine tune it better. And so now we'll move on to the mid knob. And so with the mid knob, we definitely have a lot of room to kind of tweak it as we need. With it not being overly harsh or anything, we can really push the mids to kind of cut through, which would work really good in a live or mixed setting. Below noon, it does start to get a little bit like too scooped, at least for my taste, but definitely a good bit of usable mid-range. And so we'll go ahead and check out the treble now. With the treble knob, it's definitely helping us kind of control the pick attack and stuff, and boosting it brings in some of that like airy top end, which I'm not too worried about considering this amp does have a presence knob that we'll get to, but the frequencies that the treble is based on is definitely pretty helpful in getting as much clarity as we want out of it. As we've just gone over the preamp really quick, I'm pretty happy with the overall spread of usability across all the knobs, which is really nice. And so really quick, we'll go through the thump and presence knobs, which is just a depth and presence kind of thing, and see how that interacts with everything. So far, the relationship between the presence knob and the treble knob is super usable. Something that I'm always kind of looking for is, am I able to kind of turn the presence down all the way and still get a usable tone by just cranking the treble knob? Because that kind of like shifts things around and just gives you a kind of a whole other way to control the top end of your amp. As well, we'll see if I can crank the presence and turn the treble all the way down and see how that goes. And so that gives us two different kind of areas of treble that we can kind of tweak around. And so I'll go ahead and dial in kind of just a middle of the road kind of thing using both of them. So there we have pick clarity and also some of that kind of top end airiness. And so next we'll check out the thump or depth knob. And with that, I kind of do the same thing as the presence, but instead of the treble, I would be using the bass. So I would say that the thump and bass like relationship isn't quite as good as the presence and treble, but definitely still has like a pretty wide use. And so we'll go ahead and kind of start with both at noon and see what they do in that kind of setting. So with the thump knob on this one specifically, which we might be able to change with the response and frequency, which we'll check out, but currently where it's set, I'm not super crazy about like the placement of it, but like I said, we'll go ahead and see if the response and frequency changes that at all. Seems like the response is affecting the thump and presence knob. Still not super crazy on the placement of the thump, but luckily I do like the placement of the bass knob, so I can just not push the thump too much, kind of push the bass knob more. And so now we'll go ahead and check out the frequency switch. And so that kind of seems like it's adjusting kind of where the thump knob lives, which pushing it to the left seems like it pushed it lower, which is definitely something that I'm liking more. And so we'll kind of dial that in. So that definitely seems like it's playing better with this kind of setup. And so overall, I think tonally it sounds really good. And I like that everything kind of reacts really well with each other and all that. The next few points that I kind of look at in amps are definitely more of a preference thing, and even potentially kind of just nitpicky kind of stuff, which for this one just kind of is a ease of use kind of thing. In my setup, I put all my amps kind of in a stack, and they're kind of hard to get behind just due to kind of how my room is set up and stuff like that. So right off the bat, there's a few things that I don't like with this amp, which is a lot of the really important things with this amp, and also some of the stuff that you kind of have to go back and forth and try out, like the clip and saturation switches that I was talking about earlier. And so if I have this amp in my usual stack of amps, I would pretty much never use them, / it would be kind of annoying when I'm trying to reamp a band or something, and in order to turn this amp on, I have to kind of reach around and hope that I'm hitting the right switches to turn it on. And so in the way that I use amps, that's a pretty big downside. And then next being kind of the overall volume. I think that plays a huge part in amps that I pick or amps that other people pick. 90% of me using an amp is kind of just studio use, so I don't really run it super loud a lot of the time. And so with a 100-watt amp like this, it's not really entirely necessary for me. But if you're playing in a band and you need that kind of volume, say you're playing like kind of smaller venues and stuff that don't have very good PA systems, you definitely need that headroom, especially if you're playing the type of music that I play, where once you start pushing the volume, it like the sound kind of softens up. Personally, I don't want, I like the harder attack and stuff like that. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind. But for me personally, if I were to go for this amp or, a similar one, I would probably go for a 50-watt version, just so I don't have to be as loud when I really don't need to be. But also the case could be the opposite for you, where you don't want to be super loud, but you want to be hitting that kind of area where it starts to soften up. You might also want to go for a 50-watt version or even lower wattage. I don't know if they make any lower, but yeah. And then that leads me to the price of this amp. Are the sounds that I'm getting out of it, or the just general use that I would get out of it, worth $4,000? Which would be probably a much different case for me than it would be somebody else. I do a lot of reamping and stuff like that. There is potential for me to make kind of that money back eventually. And then that train of thought kind of brings me to, is there other things similar to this that I like better? Like I said earlier in the video, I played a lot of modded Marshalls and stuff like that, which, like I mentioned, a lot of them do very similar things or are based on the exact same thing. Or even there's, I'm sure, some out there that are based on this amp specifically. And there's a lot out there that are way cheaper and just as good, if not better. So personally with this amp, I probably wouldn't buy it, just based on, I've played a bunch of other modded Marshalls that I've gotten similar results with that are probably half the price. For instance, I would probably go with like a Monomyth skeleton key, or like a Ground Zero Hellion, or Ground Zero also does a bunch of modded stuff. I really liked the MOAB Plus, which has kind of a similar thing going on. I also have a kind of one-off Sloan 50-watt amp that does a pretty similar thing that I really like. And so that's kind of just my thought. Obviously this might be, the perfect amp for you. And so yeah, that's kind of my way to get to a conclusion on whether I would want to buy and own something for my collection. Like I said, this is a extremely good amp, but personally I don't think it's kind of like unique enough or any better than other options that I've tried that did do all the things that I want, whether it be having all the switches and stuff on the front, or maybe even having more switches that made the amp more versatile. And kind of like I mentioned earlier in the video, it definitely comes down to personal preference. You know, some of the amps that I mentioned might not have a really good clean channel or something, and maybe you're really into that and this has a great clean channel. Possibly, I haven't tried it. But yeah, like I said, this is just the way that kind of I go about it, and I figured kind of walking you through that might help you in picking your amps or even deciding whether this is an amp that you want. And yeah, I think that's about it. Let me know down in the comments if this is something that you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.